Twisted Wonderland, Black Butler, maybe you've heard of these fandoms. The artist behind both of them is Yana Toboso. Her work fascinates me, and in today's video I would like to explore it to find out what we can learn from it for art and for life. Hi, I'm May, and today I'll reflect on the art, characters, worlds and stories behind Yana Toboso's work. Twisted Wonderland includes various character artworks in sprite, CG or chibi versions. Black Butler includes artworks like black and white manga pages or colored cover illustrations, and on X Yana shares even more artworks in various forms, sometimes even sketches. Since Yana draws a variety of illustrations, I thought I would mention first that my main focus for this video will be on the Twisted Wonderland CG artworks. Let's start with the line work in Yana's art. Lines are used for the character illustrations. They are rather thin but have some varying line thickness as well. In some illustrations the focus is on line work, while others can also feature some painted over lines. The varying line thickness can especially be conveyed on the face. The outline here will be thicker, while the inner lines are thinner. Lines tend to be clean, smooth and sharp. In a few illustrations a more sketchy style is used as well, with more messy lines. The lines are usually dark brown here. In more polished illustrations, for example the Twisted Wonderland CGs, lines can also be colored. They are usually darker than the color surrounding them if this is the case. For manga style and black and white illustrations, lines would be black. What I find interesting here is that the lines for the SSR illustrations can sometimes be colored as mentioned, while the lines for the less rare illustrations will mostly be black or dark brown. While I won't focus on these artworks in this video, I find it interesting that in Twisted Wonderland the smaller chibi illustrations of each character that are featured in battles, for example, don't have any outlines. The characters can be around 6 to 8 heads tall. For adult characters the bodies are taller here, proportions are slightly stylized but fairly realistic. The characters are rather slim, muscle definition is often also portrayed through shading rather than lines here. Hands are defined and rather thin. The face shape and chin are rounded. Older characters have longer faces with wider chins here. The change of direction from the face shape going inward to going upward is also rather rounded, meaning it's not at a clear point. Position-wise, it is located at around mouth height-wise and outer eye corner vertically, at least for the 3/4 view or frontal-facing faces. For heads that are more turned to the side, it is more outwards vertically between the ear and outer eye corner. Perspective can also influence the height of the change of direction, the overall face shape and the position of the ears. Noses in Yana's art are made up of a thin line, one for the nose bridge and one at the bottom of the nose, as well as a nostril usually. Often there also is a shadow or a light on or behind the nose. A small highlight can also be added. The round shape of the nose makes it characteristic as well. It adds to a softer look of the face. In the side view, a pointy, protruding small nose can be observed. In the front view, the nose can also have no lines, just 2 nostrils. Mouths in Yana's art tend to be portrayed through a rather thick line, especially the mouth corners are thick here. Then there is also a shadow added beneath the mouth to define the lower lip. Some shading can be added to the lips as well. At times a highlight would also be added, making the lips appear a bit shiny. Mouths can be bigger or smaller depending on the character. For open mouths, the varying tooth shapes would also stand out to me. Some characters have sharp zigzaggy teeth. For the inside of the mouth, the tongue can also be visible, and often the inside of the mouth would also be shaded here. Colors for the inside of the mouth are rather desaturated. What can make the faces more expressive or unique would be the eyebrows. These can range from thicker to thinner shapes with different lengths. It depends on the character. The expression often changes the angle of the eyebrows here. What can also be affected by the expression would be the eyes, which I'll talk about next. The eyes have an almond shape usually. For younger looking characters, the eyes will generally be bigger and lower on the face. For older characters, the eye shape is usually more narrow as well. Female characters can have bigger, rounder eyes than male characters. For some characters, and in especially more detailed illustrations, small lashes can be added onto the eyelid. Generally, the upper eyeline is thicker with a clear shape, the lower eyeline is thin, in some cases with gaps in between. What's characteristic for the Twisted Wonderland illustrations especially is the line below the lower outer eyeline that often transitions into the shading. It even is indicated in some pen illustrations Yana drew. It adds some depth to the eyes. Then there would be the other lines above the eye. Here we usually have 2 lines, one shorter line directly above the eye. It can sometimes transition into the upper eyelash as well. The shorter line above the eyeline often follows the eye shape. It can be more straight. The longer line above the eye usually has a shorter vertical curve transitioning into a longer horizontal curve. One eyelash would always be there at the upper outer eye. Other lines can sometimes be added on the upper eyelash or on the lower eyelash. Now moving on to what's inside the eye shape, the iris. The iris has a round shape. It can be bigger for younger characters and smaller for older characters. The shading detail tends to vary depending on the illustration, but generally the upper part of the iris will be darker than the lower part. Pupil shapes and size can vary as well. Here are layers I would use for a similar eye shading result to Yana's art. First would be a base layer, next a shadow layer for the upper part of the iris. After this we'd have a detail layer at the bottom of the iris. The detail can include small shapes, one dot, or in some illustrations it can not appear as well. For the white of the eye, a shadow that's cast from the eyelash can be added. Sometimes it also features a darker outline. Finally, for highlights, these can be but are not always added. When they're added, they can be within the pupil or within the iris. They usually have a rounded shape. Now for all the other shading on the face I haven't mentioned yet, what stands out would be that often characters have some kind of eyeshadow or even makeup. This gives more emphasis to the eyes. Then above the eye, a small shadow beneath the eyebrow or around the upper eye lines is common. It is especially added at the inner part of the eye but can also be included at the outer side of the eye. A small highlight on the skin beneath the eye is another unique but common characteristic in Yana's art. Hair tends to be portrayed through lines with varying thickness. Inner lines are often thinner, while outer lines are thicker and sometimes darker. Yana especially makes the areas where lines meet, where lines intersect, thicker here. Zigzaggy and rounded shapes are commonly used, and hair strands are defined by lines, especially for the black and white manga illustrations. For the colored artwork's hair shading, which tends to be sharp and sleek similar to the lines, can also define strands and add structure. Here are layers I would use for a similar hair shading result to Yana's art. First would be a base layer, next a first shadow layer. I painted in the outline of the shadow area and then selected this area here, painting in the shadows with an airbrush and varying opacity. After this would be a darker shadow layer. It further separates some parts of the hair. Next I would add a layer for reflected light, which is applied with a soft gradient here. Finally I'd add a layer for highlights. For the Twisted Wonderland cards, they often have a sharp diamond shape and tend to be placed around the forehead. These are layers I would use for a look like the Twisted Wonderland cards. The shading can also look a bit different in other artworks. For characters like Idea, whose hair is made of blue fire, the shading is different as well. The last aspect for the hair I will mention is how the facial features, such as eyebrows and eyes, appear when they are covered by hair. When this happens, the eyelashes and eyebrows are usually fully covered. In some cases, lashes underneath can still be slightly visible. Outfits in Yana's art tend to have a dark fantasy and formal aesthetic. They are drawn with thin lines focusing on the silhouettes and some folds. Clothing folds are often conveyed through shading as well. What stands out about the clothes to me would be the detailed patterns and accessories that are sometimes added. It's impressive how all of them are drawn in a lot of detail with correct perspective. Doing this must take a lot of time. I could also imagine that Yana designs one accessoire or pattern in a front-on perspective and then uses transform tools to make it match the character's pose, or that some kind of brushes, assets, or perspective tools are used. The design and portrayal of the clothes is fascinating to me. I especially like the dorm uniforms in Twisted Wonderland. The colors Yana uses can range from more neon ones to muted tones. Generally, a lot of dark tones are used, black parts being a common part of different character and outfit designs. The colors can be described as dark and bold, elegant and refined. Golden or silver accents and colors are also very common. The darker outfits and light skin tones many characters have lead to a lot of contrast, usually drawing attention to the face. There also tends to be a lot of contrast in the illustration, which is often affected by the aspect I'll talk about next, the shading. Cell shading is commonly used here, meaning you have clearly defined shadow areas with sharp edges. Sometimes this is also combined with some gradients and blurred edges that add more depth. In some cases, textures can also be implemented in more painterly illustrations, especially. A common element that would be characteristic for Yana's art would be a highlight added along silhouettes and edges at different places. A darker shadow outline can also be used, often on the skin, which adds a lively effect through subsurface scattering. Depending on the illustration, various lighting setups can be used. The character sprites in Twisted Wonderland feature a more neutral, brightly lit lighting. The CG card illustrations can feature various lighting colors, intensity, and directions. For example, light from only one side can be used, or lighting from below, which can add a more intimidating, at times even unsettling look. The more neutral lighting features less contrast from the lighting, while the different lighting setups in other artworks, for which lighting from the back is often used, usually adds a lot of contrast through the bright parts in light. Next, let's go over some shading layers. First is a base layer, next a fast shadow layer. Since this illustration features mostly cell shading, you can select an area and use a brush with varying opacity to fill this in. The next layer would be a darker shadow layer. This separates a few parts and adds depth. The shadows in this illustration mostly include sharp shapes. As a final layer for this artwork, I would add a light layer. This features a bright white color as well as a bright blue one as kind of a transition. For other illustrations, another layer for a saturated border may also be added. Finally, let's talk about the extra effects and backgrounds. Background-wise, Twisted Wonderland cards can either have a more graphic design look with patterns, props, and symbols added, or they can feature detailed scenes. Overall, more complex perspectives, shading, and backgrounds will be used for more rare illustrations, while ones with more front-on poses and neutral lighting will often feature less detailed backgrounds or scenes. For these, a similar or the same background can be reused for different card series. When patterns or symbols are used, they will often feature no outlines, making them stand out from the character this way. This is similar for the detailed backgrounds that feature full scenes. The elements here are not outlined and often blurred. They also tend to be stylized, and textures can often be included. Now for the backgrounds in other illustrations. These can vary a lot. When a background is included, it tends to feature graphic elements or a scene, or a combination of both. Frames, borders, and sparkles are common elements in Yana's art, especially for the graphic design look. As small effects, magic sparkles will often be added for the Twisted Wonderland CG illustrations. Other than this, flowing elements like petals or stars can also be added as extra effects. Now that we've looked at different elements in Yana Toboso's work, I'd like to take what we learned and apply it to a character of my own. As we went through the analysis, you saw me work on a sprite for one of my original characters, Yumari, who would be the moon guardian of his world. I would like to use this sprite to work on a full Twisted Wonderland inspired illustration. The goal isn't to copy Yana, but to understand the thought process behind her work and see how those ideas can shape our own creativity in a meaningful way. As we go through each stage, sketch, lines, colors, shading, and final effects, I'll share how Yana approaches these steps, how I'm applying what I learned, and some thoughts that connect art, storytelling, and life. Because good art doesn't just look nice, it can make us think, feel, and even learn something. Sketches tend to be loose but intentional. Often they start with the core idea of the character, their personality, silhouette, and the emotion of the scene, before worrying about details. Even in early drafts, storytelling can be kept in mind. Posture, expression, and small gestures already hint at who the character is. It's less about creating a clean sketch and more about finding the heart of the character. For my sketch, I first focused on who this character is to come up with a pose. I already had the pose thumbnail here from a previous document with multiple poses. Since I am drawing Yumari, I know that he is calm and gentle, and that's what I wanted this pose to convey. Since I really like the star-sending robes outfits, I decided to draw him in this outfit here. It also fits to Yumari as a character, since he is the moon guardian of his world. I don't have as much experience with drawing backgrounds as with characters. For the background here, I mostly referenced other Twisted Wonderland cards. I decided that I wanted to add some trees with these star decorations, similarly to other cards from this series, and then that there could maybe be some castles as well. Both Black Butler and Twisted Wonderland start with characters who are flawed or complicated. They're not finished products. Their first impressions rarely show their full story, and that's intentional. Just like a sketch, characters begin rough around the edges. We learn who they are over time through their choices. Sketches aren't final, and neither are we. We're allowed to start messy. If the first version of you or your work isn't perfect, that's normal. The important part is having a direction to grow toward. Line art can be used to create clarity and focus by making it clean, confident, and expressive. Yana can vary line weight here, thicker lines in shadows or where forms overlap, thinner line for delicate areas. The lines aren't just outlines, they guide the viewer's eye and support the mood of the character. Even small line decisions help show personality, sharp angles, soft curves, or controlled elegance. When I drew in the line art here, I wanted to focus on making outer parts thicker and inner parts, or details thinner. Something I only realized later though is that many of my lines were kind of too rough or not detailed enough, mostly for the smaller accessoires. The accuracy with which each outfit detail, whether it's a small jewelry piece or a pattern, is drawn in Yana's CG artworks is fascinating to me. It's something I would like to learn from. When you think about both Black Butler and Twisted Wonderland's stories, the lines, the boundaries are often blurred. Characters try to define themselves, but their identity isn't always clear. Many cross lines morally, chasing power, freedom, or purpose. In real life, we also try to draw the lines of who we are, what we stand for, what we allow, and who we want to become. Some lines protect us, others limit us if they're drawn in the wrong place. It's okay to refine the lines in your life as you grow. Not everything you once accepted has to stay part of your identity. You can redraw boundaries that no longer fit who you want to become. Yana chooses colors with intention. In both her illustrations and character designs, color expresses personality and sets the emotional tone. She often uses limited palettes with a few accent colors to keep the design unified. Colors might reflect a character's background, their role in the story, or a feeling she wants the viewer to have. Even small color choices can influence how we read a character: calm, mischievous, elegant, or mysterious. After the line art, I could fill in the colors. For the outfit, I could mostly reference other Twisted Wonderland cards or the character's sprites, including the star-sending robes outfit. For the whole piece, I wanted there to be a nighttime setting, something I haven't drawn many times before, but I was looking forward to this as a bit of a challenge. I blocked in colors for the background and overall shading, paying attention to an interesting lighting scenario. For me, blocking in the shading roughly helps to make a decision with the final lighting or shading setup to use. What looks nice here often depends on the values, which are often influenced by the flat colors of the artwork before any shading is applied. If you think about it, color in storytelling works like emotion in life. Twisted Wonderland plays with contrasting moods, charm mixed with mischief, beauty mixed with flaws. Black Butler contrasts elegance with darkness. These contrasts are part of why the stories feel emotionally layered. Not everything is pure light or pure shadow. But something both worlds don't show is true inner transformation. Characters grow, but they rarely become new. Their flaws stay part of them, almost like permanent colors on a palette. In life, we also carry a mix of light and dark moments, strengths and weaknesses, but those don't have to define us permanently. Unlike a fictional character written to stay similar, even with transformation for the sake of the story, we're not stuck with the colors we start with. We're allowed to change and undergo a complete transformation over time. This may be a kind of weird example, but back when I used to play Movie Star Planet, I had a phase where I loved neon green and black outfit pieces. In real life, I would also mostly dress in dark colors. Then, after quarantine, I got more interested in a bright pastel aesthetic and preferred this. Just this change in color preference and outfits can also relate to how our personalities and priorities in life can change over time. I had phases where I would be obsessed with romantic relationships, video games, health, cartoons, anime or music, worldly things, but I discovered that no matter what of these things were my big interest or obsession at the time, it didn't really fulfill me, because these things are temporary, not always reliable and imperfect. When asking what my true purpose is, what I am living for, the answer felt empty. After thinking about it for some time, except for the romantic relationships, all of the things I mentioned are still interests of mine, but I balance all of them more in my current life with a different main priority. Sometimes life brings people or situations that add new colors to us, experiences that teach us things like wisdom, confidence, or resilience. All of these influences can shape you over time. Yana's shading is thoughtful, enhancing drama and mood. She often uses shadows to emphasize the character's expression, clothing details, and the story moment. Instead of shading everything evenly, many, especially the SSR, CG illustrations, focus on contrast, deciding where the viewer should look first. Light and shadow work together to highlight the emotional point of the illustration. This can make the characters feel more alive. While shading, I went through the different layer groups I set up one for one, starting with the skin, eyes and hair and ending with the outfit. As I did this, I focused on guiding the viewer's eye by, for example, adding more contrast where I wanted attention and softening areas that should stay subtle. Especially the face should stand out to me, which was a bit difficult to achieve because the values are pretty similar due to Yumari's lighter hair. The darker purple eyes add a bit of contrast, but the outfit or the background have a lot more darker tones, for example. However, this meant that the mostly light tones of Yumari's head could nicely contrast with the rest of the illustration, which has more dark tones. While the head on its own may not have as much contrast, it provides a nice contrast to the overall illustration, which should draw some focus to it. At least that's what I hope. You can also let me know your thoughts on this. I would appreciate the feedback. I also generally added more detailed, sharp shading for the hair, for example, while the outfit has more soft shading. Gold as a material is different though, so I wanted to portray this as well by adding more lights or sharp shapes here. I wanted to treat the shading not just as a technical step, but as a way to support the feeling behind the illustration, to convey the nighttime atmosphere. Both stories, Twisted Wonderland and Black Butler, lean into darkness, broken pasts, secrets, pride, envy, revenge, or longing. Characters face their shadows, but often live in them rather than truly stepping out. Their struggles are relatable because we all deal with internal shadows, things we wish were different, mistakes, insecurities, or parts of ourselves we hide. In stories, shadows create drama. In real life, shadows can either hold us down or help us see the light more clearly. Light and shadow are both part of depth, in art and in life. If everything was light, nothing would stand out. The hard moments in our lives can teach us, shape us, and deepen our view of the world. They don't have to be the end of our story. A light source defines where the shadows fall. Shadows can remind us to look for direction, determining where or what our light source is. And when we find something steady, hopeful, and good to guide us, it gives meaning to both the bright and difficult parts of life. In Yana's finished illustrations, the last details bring everything together. These might be small highlights, texture on clothing, subtle glow, particles, or graphic elements that support the character's personality. The effects don't overwhelm the artwork, they enhance the mood, whether it's a magical sparkle, a fabric texture, or a soft rim light. Finishing touches help the character feel like they belong in their world. For my final touches, I first focused on the background. I started by roughly painting in parts, not defining them in a detailed way, but focusing on shapes. It's something I sometimes saw in Yana's CG artworks as well, a slight stylization that helps to draw attention to the more detailed character. Then I went into Clip Studio Paint to look for any assets I could use for the background, to add textures for example. I experimented with these. I wanted to add details that fit the illustration without overloading the image. Small highlights, a soft glow, and a few atmospheric elements can help connect the character to their environment. I wanted to make sure the effects supported the illustration instead of distracting from it by adding just enough of them to make the artwork feel complete. One reason many people connect with these stories is the aesthetic of them, the charm, mystery, elegance, and the imaginative worlds. Twisted Wonderland adds magic and style. Black Butler brings historical flair mixed with supernatural elements. These finishing touches, the storytelling atmosphere, make the worlds feel deeper and more captivating. In a way, the final effects in art may be like the small things in life that add meaning, an insightful conversation that brings you forward, a moment of peace after a long day or week, seeing, hearing, or experiencing something beautiful that makes you feel inspired. It may seem like something small, but over time these moments add up. Sometimes what we remember isn't the grand moment, it's the small detail that made us feel seen, understood, or hopeful. Then I looked at the illustration again and I critiqued it, pointing out several things I would like to fix. I blend in my list of what I wrote down here on screen. As I show you the process of fixing the illustration, I'll talk a bit more about Twisted Wonderland and Black Butler. The storylines in Twisted Wonderland or Black Butler offer something many of us can relate to: characters with flaws, insecurities, and complicated emotions. They mess up, learn, try again, but rarely become completely different people. Their arcs explore growth, but not deep transformation. That's part of what makes them interesting. We see a bit of ourselves in their struggles. Now I'd like to share some of my own reflections on fandoms in general. This is based on my own experiences, so I don't know if you can relate to this. However, I hope this is interesting and may be helpful for you as well. In stories, characters are written to stay a certain way because it serves the plot. In real life, we're not limited by a script, we're not written to stay the same, we're allowed to change and improve, we're allowed to heal, we're allowed to grow beyond who we were yesterday. Fandoms, comfort characters, and fictional worlds can inspire us, comfort us, or spark creativity, and that's a gift. Imagination is something humans were uniquely given. We were made to create, to dream, to enjoy stories, but it can become heavy when a fictional world becomes the place we escape to instead of the place we draw inspiration from. There's a difference between enjoying a world and using it to replace our own. Even the most beautiful story can't completely fulfill the deeper parts of us, the parts that long for meaning, belonging, and lasting peace. That's not a flaw in stories, it's just that they're not meant to carry that responsibility. Many arcs in Twisted Wonderland hint at themes like pride, envy, desire, bitterness, longing for validation, and how chasing those things comes with consequences. Black Butler shows what happens when someone seeks purpose or justice outside of a good foundation. It always costs something. They show the struggle well, but not the solution. To me, I learned that stories and characters can make life a lot more interesting and enjoyable. They can sustain you, but you'll always want something a bit more for your life, something fictional characters and stories can't provide for you. As someone who mostly relied on anime and fandoms for a while to seek fulfillment and meaning in life, and discovering how these worldly and human-made things always come with imperfections, here's a thought I would like to leave with you. If fictional worlds can move us this deeply, imagine how meaningful the real story of our life could be when it is rooted in something solid, something that doesn't fade and or rely on us being perfect. We all look for a purpose and meaning in life, and we all have the ability to find it. Stories can inspire us, but they're not where our identity or worth has to come from. They aren't eternal because our life here on Earth comes to an end at some point. Feel free to reflect on these questions for yourself, maybe it helps you. What are you hoping to find in the stories or characters you connect with? What would it look like if you found those things in your real life too? What kind of story do you want your life to tell? What's your purpose? And what foundation is it built on? This is not to pull anyone away from things they enjoy, but to encourage grounding your heart in something that doesn't shift with phases of life, trends, updates, or characters. Stories and servers shut down, trends move on, but your value and purpose don't have to move with them. Your story doesn't have to end. With everything I said, I wanted to mention that I'm an imperfect human sharing my own thoughts and opinion. You can reflect on these ideas and take from it what you want. I encourage being reflective and mindful with any content you consume. We're all shaped by different experiences and circumstances. Understanding is helpful to develop empathy, but applying what someone else does for yourself may not always make sense. In any case, if you're someone who turns to stories for comfort, inspiration, or identity, I get it. Many of us do, or maybe did for some time. Creativity and imagination are gifts, and they make life richer. I really like a lot of fictional characters, stories, and worlds. They make up a lot of my childhood and are one of my biggest inspirations to this day. However, appreciating these things makes the most sense when we ourselves are rooted in something real and steady, and we don't need to depend on any of these things, but rather when we see them as an interest, something we enjoy, but also something that doesn't need to define us. If something in this video encouraged you, made you think, or helped you look at things from a new angle, I'm glad. With that, the final version of the illustration of Yumari is done. Which dom would he fit into in the Twisted Wonderland universe to you? Let me know in the comments. You can find Yana's social media links in the video description. Getting to analyze Yana's work was very insightful and inspiring. I'm very grateful for her work and wish her all the best. On my Patreon you can find full screen recorded process videos, time-lapses and more. If you'd like to support me, feel free to check it out. Leaving a like on this video and subscribing for more videos like these in the future would also mean a lot. Thank you for watching, have a nice day, bye.